Cassandra Johnson, a federal prosecutor, is determined to expose the corruption within the justice system. But when she uncovers the powerful figures pulling the strings, can she find the strength to fight back and bring the truth to light? Will she triumph or be consumed by the very system she once believed in? What would you do if you had to face an entire system stacked against you? Let us know in the comments and make sure to like and subscribe, because tomorrow we have an even more thrilling story waiting for you. Cassandra Johnson stood in the middle of the courtroom, the harsh lights casting shadows on the stern face of Judge Marcus Williams. The middle-aged man, with his graying hair and piercing gaze, commanded the room with an authority that made it impossible for anyone to question him. Known for his tough, no-nonsense rulings, Judge Williams had earned respect, but there were whispers that followed him. Whispers of racial bias buried beneath his decisions. Cassandra knew the rumors. Despite being a seasoned federal prosecutor, fighting through countless cases, she felt like a stranger in this room, one where the powers that be could manipulate the system to their advantage. She glanced up, realizing that she wasn't just facing a judge, she was facing an entire system that had slowly eaten away at the very justice she had dedicated her life to. She had fought hard to get to where she was, but now she understood that this was going to be a fight like no other. Then came the call, the one that would change everything. Cassandra, we've lost contact with your key witness. She's gone. The chill that ran through her was immediate, a sense of dread that gripped her entire body. This wasn't just a career setback. This was a life-or-death battle for the truth. A missing witness meant everything she'd worked for could unravel in an instant, letting the criminals she was chasing slip through the cracks. Cassandra hung up the phone, her chest tightening. For a brief moment, she felt utterly alone, like the weight of the world was pressing down on her. Despite being a federal prosecutor, she was up against something far bigger than herself. And it wasn't just the criminals she had to worry about, it was the very system she'd trusted to protect the truth. The system that seemed to be working against her at every turn. What if the truth was already buried too deep? The thought echoed in her mind. Could she really fight against the tide of corruption? Or would she be swept away by it, just like everyone else who tried before her? The feeling of being lost in the battle was suffocating. For a brief moment, Cassandra felt the walls closing in, suffocated by the pressure. It was clear to her now, this fight wasn't just about one case. It was about her belief in justice, and whether that belief was enough to carry her through the storm ahead. Cassandra entered the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply against the cold, polished floor. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken words as she made her way to the front. Judge Marcus Williams sat at the bench, his face set in stone, eyes sharp and unyielding. The faintest trace of gray in his hair seemed to add weight to the aura of authority that surrounded him. He was a man whose reputation preceded him, known for his strict rulings, but even more notorious for the whispers of racial bias that followed him wherever he went. Cassandra had prepared for this moment for weeks. She had reviewed the case files, gone over every detail, rehearsed her arguments, and knew exactly what she needed to say. But as soon as she spoke, it was clear the judge wasn't interested in hearing it. "Miss Johnson," Judge Williams said, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. "I'm not here for your excuses. This case is clear. There's nothing to discuss." She barely had time to react before he raised his hand to silence her, dismissing her attempts to present a solid defense. Her voice faltered, and her heart sank as he dismissed her entire argument with a casual wave of his hand. It wasn't just the words. It was the attitude, the condescending tone that came from someone who already had his mind made up before hearing a single word of her defense. Cassandra knew the game was rigged before she even started playing. He flicked his gavel, and without hesitation, passed down a $500 fine for a violation that Cassandra knew she hadn't committed. A small, insignificant error in the paperwork that had no bearing on the case. And yet here she was, standing in front of a judge who seemed more interested in making an example of her than in delivering justice. The room fell silent. Cassandra's fingers tightened around the papers she held in her hand. All eyes were on her, but there was no comfort in the attention. She wasn't the only one in the room who could feel the injustice weighing on her shoulders. The spectators murmured, some with curiosity, others with judgment. It was clear she was the only one here being treated this way. The defendants around her, no matter their crimes, received a far lighter hand than she ever could. A wave of helplessness washed over her. She had worked so hard to get here, to be where she was, only to face a system that wasn't built for someone like her. A system that, in this moment, didn't care about the truth. It only cared about power. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Cassandra wasn't going to let one unjust ruling stop her from fighting. Not today. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but firm as she spoke. Your Honor, I would like to contest this fine. I'm a federal prosecutor, and I've spent my life defending the law. I cannot accept this decision. Judge Williams' eyes narrowed and his lips curled into a slight smirk. There was no warmth in it, only the cold, dismissive confidence of someone who had already decided how things would go. Miss Johnson, he said, leaning forward, if you don't like the fine, you can always appeal. But we both know how that will turn out. Cassandra felt her chest tighten, her heart pounding. She didn't even need to look around to know that the tension in the room had shifted. The weight of his words, the finality in his tone, made it feel as though the walls were closing in. She was a target, and the longer she stayed in this system, the more she realized that it wasn't just this case she was fighting. It was a system that saw her as an outsider, as someone to be dismissed. But as the silence dragged on, something shifted. Cassandra refused to back down. She knew she had a role to play, and it wasn't just as a prosecutor. She was here to fight for what was right, not just for her clients, but for the very justice she devoted her life to. Your Honor, she began again, her voice firm. I am not just any attorney. I'm a federal prosecutor. This isn't just about the fine. This is about a system that needs to be called out for what it is. She could feel the room shift. People were listening now. And for the first time that day, Cassandra felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone. And no matter how hard they tried to push her down, she wasn't going to stop fighting. Cassandra stood tall, her gaze unwavering as it met Judge Marcus Williams. The courtroom was thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but in that moment, it was as if she was the only one there. She had already decided it was time to reveal who she really was. With a deep breath, Cassandra's voice rang out with a quiet yet undeniable force. Cassandra felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the courtroom pressing down on her. Her pulse quickened. Should she say it? Should she let him know? She had spent years keeping her identity separate from moments like this, knowing that once she spoke those words, everything would shift. No going back. But then she saw it. That smug smirk on William's face, dripping with dismissive arrogance. He thought he had already won. She lifted her chin. Your Honor, I work for the United States Department of Justice. Her words dropped into the room like a bombshell, startling everyone, even herself. A ripple of shock ran through the gallery, as heads turned and whispers began to spread. She could almost feel the air shift, as if the very atmosphere of the courtroom had changed with those few words. Judge Williams' face froze for a split second. The cocky smirk that had adorned his lips faltered, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. But just as quickly, he regained his composure, leaning back in his chair as though trying to regain control of the room. His eyes, however, couldn't hide the flicker of doubt that crossed his mind. Cassandra had just done something unexpected, something that couldn't be easily dismissed. He cleared his throat, then smirked again, his voice dripping with condescension. A federal prosecutor, huh? He said, his tone colder than before. Well, that doesn't change the fact that you're wasting my time. Cassandra felt her insides twist, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment she had been preparing for. He could mock her all he wanted, but it didn't change the truth. And the truth was, she had earned her place here, just like anyone else. But even as she stood her ground, there was a gnawing feeling inside of her. A feeling that only grew stronger as Judge Williams carried on with his dismissive attitude. A rift began to form in Cassandra's heart. A deep conflict between the ideals she had always believed in and the painful reality of what she was facing in this room. She had dedicated her entire career to the pursuit of justice, and yet, here she was, standing before a judge who wasn't interested in fairness or truth, but in maintaining his own power. The system that she had believed in for so long, the very system that was supposed to protect the innocent and uphold justice, was now the very thing standing in her way. It felt like a betrayal. Cassandra had fought so hard to get where she was, but now the weight of that fight was sinking in. The truth didn't matter in this courtroom. What mattered was who had the power, and right now, that was Judge Williams. And no matter what Cassandra said or did, it didn't seem like that would change. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the frustration, but deep inside, the questions kept resurfacing. How much longer could she keep fighting this system? Could she still believe in it when it seemed so deeply flawed, when the very people who were meant to uphold the law were willing to twist it for their own gain? For a brief moment, she let herself feel the weight of that doubt, but only for a moment. Cassandra had come too far to let this break her. She took another deep breath and, without a hint of hesitation, steadied herself for what came next. She wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not ever. After the trial, Cassandra couldn't shake the image of Judge Marcus Williams from her mind. His dismissive attitude, his cold judgment, it all replayed over and over in her head. She couldn't just let it go. There was something about his behavior, something unsettling, that gnawed at her. She had to know more. So, Cassandra began her investigation. She started looking into his past cases, piecing together what she could from the records. The deeper she dug, the more the unsettling truth started to come into focus. She learned that Marcus Williams wasn't just a strict judge. He was a judge with a disturbing pattern. A pattern of biased rulings, especially when it came to cases involving black defendants. Time and time again, he handed down excessively harsh sentences, even when the evidence didn't warrant it. Cassandra's gut tightened as she flipped through the case files, each page revealing more of the same. He wasn't just a tough judge, he was a man who used his power to punish, to control, and in his eyes, some people just didn't deserve fairness. Each case was a reminder of how the system could be twisted, how some lives didn't matter as much as others. But this wasn't just about one biased judge, this was about something much bigger. The deeper Cassandra went, the more she realized that Williams wasn't just a product of the system, he was actively exploiting it. The evidence started to pile up. Connections to individuals with shady reputations, hints of involvement with corrupt figures in the legal system. It became clear to Cassandra that Williams wasn't just making biased decisions, he was complicit in something darker. Her heart raced as she pieced everything together. Marcus Williams had ties to corruption within the very system he was supposed to uphold. There were names, dates, and connections that pointed to something far more sinister. Bribes, backroom deals, and the kind of power plays that would make any honest person sick to their stomach. For a moment, Cassandra stopped, letting the weight of what she had uncovered sink in. She wasn't just up against one corrupt judge. She was up against a system that was rotten to its core, where the people in charge didn't care about justice, only about control. The realization hit her hard, like a punch to the gut. How deep did this go? Could she expose this without putting herself in even greater danger? Her pulse quickened as she thought about everything she had to lose. But then, the determination within her grew stronger. She couldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. The system needed to be changed, and if she was going to be part of that change, she had to keep pushing forward, no matter the consequences. Cassandra sat alone in her office, the faint light from her desk lamp casting long shadows across the scattered paperwork. She stared blankly at the documents about Judge Marcus Williams, but her mind wasn't on the case. She couldn't stop replaying the events of the trial, the judge's dismissive attitude, his cold, unjust ruling. The tension in her chest wouldn't subside. Every breath felt tight, every thought clouded by the same question. What was she supposed to do now? She had gone too far to turn back. The truth she had uncovered, the corruption, the systemic biases, could no longer be ignored. She had proof. But now came the real decision. What was the cost of revealing it? Cassandra found herself caught in an impossible position. On one hand, she could expose everything, bring the truth to light, and face the consequences. That meant not only risking her career, but also putting herself at odds with the very system she had worked so hard to become a part of. The people she had once seen as colleagues, those she had trusted, could become her enemies. On the other hand, she could stay silent, protect her career, and continue with her life as it had been, free of danger, free from conflict. But that silence would come with a price too. The truth would stay hidden, and the injustice would go unchallenged. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. This wasn't just a choice between right and wrong. It was a question of everything she had worked for. Cassandra's hands trembled as she stared at the evidence on her desk. Could she live with herself if she stayed silent? Could she be complicit in the same system she had once believed in so wholeheartedly? Her career, her future, everything was at stake. The deeper she thought about it, the more she felt a sense of betrayal creeping into her heart. The system she had trusted, the very institution she had dedicated her life to, was now turning its back on her. The truth was being twisted, and the people in power were protecting their own, leaving those like her to fend for themselves. She had been betrayed by the very thing she had spent years defending. Betrayal was the word that kept coming back to her. She had given her all to this system. She had believed in its ideals, fought for its justice. And yet, here she was, feeling like it had turned against her, abandoned her when she needed it most. How could she trust a system that was willing to let its own defenders fall? How could she continue to fight for something that seemed so easily corrupted? For a moment, the weight of it all almost crushed her. The path ahead seemed too uncertain, the stakes too high. But then, through the uncertainty, came a quiet determination. Cassandra couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not after everything she had already uncovered. She had to keep going, for the sake of the people who couldn't fight back, for the victims who had been swept under the rug by this broken system. She couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She wouldn't. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences awaited her, she had to do what was right. The truth had to be revealed, even if it meant standing alone. Cassandra couldn't stop thinking about Richard Monroe. At first, he had seemed like just another name in the political and legal world, a wealthy billionaire whose influence stretched far beyond her reach. But as she dug deeper into her investigation, the pieces began to fall into place, and what she uncovered shocked her to her core. Richard Monroe wasn't just a businessman, he was the puppet master. He wasn't merely connected to corrupt judges and officials, he was the one pulling the strings. Monroe had carefully constructed a network of influence, manipulating the system to serve his interests, no matter who got hurt in the process. The judges he controlled, the officials who answered to him, they all had one thing in common. They were all working to protect Monroe's empire, ensuring that the law bent to his will. The deeper Cassandra went into his web, the clearer it became. She found records, payments, and deals that linked him to high-profile figures, people whose names she had never imagined would be associated with such corruption. Monroe wasn't just a bystander, he was the orchestrator of the entire operation. But as she pieced together the puzzle, something far darker emerged. The witnesses she had hoped would help her, who could have exposed the truth, had vanished. One by one, the key figures who had been critical to her case seemed to disappear without a trace. Some were silenced in the most brutal ways. Cassandra felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was about a deep-rooted systemic problem. A powerful network that had been thriving for years, hidden right under her nose. The weight of the truth started to settle in her chest, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. It was a fight for survival. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and she realized that if she kept going down this path, there was no turning back. The realization hit her with a crushing force. Monroe's reach extended beyond her case. It was as if she had stumbled upon something much larger than herself, something that could destroy not just the case but everything she had ever believed in. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous this investigation became. And now, Cassandra wasn't just chasing justice, she was running for her life. Cassandra's pulse pounded in her ears as she stepped through the towering glass doors of Monroe Global Holdings. The air inside was unnaturally still, the polished marble floors reflecting the city lights from outside. This was the heart of Richard Monroe's empire, a fortress built on power, wealth, and corruption. She had spent months uncovering his secrets, chasing down leads that vanished into thin air, watching witnesses disappear before they could speak. Now, she was done playing by the rules. This time, she was bringing the fight to him. Pushing past Monroe's assistant, Cassandra strode into his sprawling, dimly lit office. Monroe sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, his presence just as suffocating as the room itself. The scent of expensive cigars lingered in the air, mixing with the distant hum of city traffic from the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. He looked up slowly, like a king surveying an uninvited guest. A smirk crept onto his lips. "Ah, Miss Harper." His voice was smooth, effortless, the sound of a man who had never feared consequences. "You could have just scheduled a meeting. No need for the dramatics." Cassandra didn't take the bait. She walked forward, her heels clicking against the cold marble, and dropped a thick file onto his desk. "You and I both know why I'm here." Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched at her sides. "It's over, Monroe. I have the evidence, the money trails, the backroom deals, the judges you own, the people who've disappeared." Monroe's eyes flickered over the documents before him, but he didn't even bother opening them. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, his amusement growing. "You think a few pieces of paper will bring me down?" He reached for his phone, tapping the screen. Cassandra's breath caught. What was he doing? Calling security? Calling someone worse? "Here's the thing, Miss Harper," Monroe continued, his voice smooth. "People like me, we don't lose." He slid his phone across the desk. "Take a look." Cassandra glanced down. A single image filled the screen. Her home. The lights were on. A dark figure stood near the front door. Monroe smirked. "Still think you've won?" He let out a short, cold laugh. "You have no idea how this game is played, do you? The law doesn't work the way you think it does." Cassandra didn't blink. She had expected this. "Oh, I understand exactly how it works," she shot back. "I understand that people like you think you're untouchable, that your money buys silence, that you can erase anyone who stands in your way." She leaned in slightly, her voice sharp, "But not this time." Monroe's smile thinned. The air in the room shifted. The amusement faded, replaced by something far colder. He stood, smoothing out his suit jacket as he rounded the desk, closing the space between them. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator sizing up his prey. "You're making a mistake, Miss Harper," he murmured, his voice lower now. "You think you've won something here? You haven't. All you've done is put yourself in check." Cassandra felt her heart hammer in her chest, but she refused to look away. She knew his type, men who believed fear was the strongest weapon, and for too long it had been. She tilted her head, studying him like he had studied her. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Check?" she repeated, her voice quieter now, laced with something Monroe didn't expect, certainty. "No, Monroe, this isn't check, it's checkmate." For the first time, Monroe hesitated. Just for a split second. But she saw it, and she knew she had won. The air outside was crisp, the city lights flickering like distant stars against the midnight sky. The courthouse lights buzzed softly in the night air as Cassandra stepped outside. For the first time in months, she exhaled. It was over. Monroe was finished. The reporters had their story. The press was tearing him apart. The case would go to trial, and for once, the law would do what it was meant to do. She closed her eyes, letting the cool night air fill her lungs. She had won. Her phone buzzed. A blocked number. Her stomach tightened. Slowly, she answered. A voice, low, measured, deliberate. Not Monroe. Someone else. Someone bigger. "You really think this is over, Miss Harper?" Bookmark. Go back. The evidence had been leaked. The press was already running the story, and arrest warrants were being issued. Monroe's empire was crumbling. And yet, as she looked out over the city, she felt no relief. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before pulling it out. The number was blocked. She exhaled sharply, then answered. A voice, low, measured, deliberate, spoke on the other end. Not Monroe. Someone else. Someone bigger. "You really think this is over, Miss Harper?" A chill ran down her spine. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. The voice continued. "Monroe was just a piece on the board. You should have stayed out of this. But now you've made yourself a problem." Click. The line went dead. Cassandra stared at her screen, the weight of those words settling deep into her bones. Monroe was just a piece, and that meant the real players were still out there, watching, waiting. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and straightened her shoulders. Fear flickered inside her, but it didn't consume her. Not anymore. She had seen the truth. And now, she couldn't unsee it. She turned toward the courthouse doors one last time before walking away, disappearing into the city night. She wasn't done. Not even close. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every interaction helps us create more powerful stories that challenge, inspire, and keep you coming back for more. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the next story is even bigger. Your support means everything. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.